Have you ever started drawing digitally and you found a picture that looked nice at the time and drew it as your first digital art piece? Then you proceeded to draw the same picture every year since? Yeah, that's me, and I'm about to rant to you on how I drew the same picture for 5 years in a row. They weren't even on the same month. Oh, I got one. Yep, it's an emotional ride. Let's get into it. A couple weeks ago, I talked about my progress as a whole, but as you probably know if you read the title of this video, I will now be talking about my digital art process. This will actually be only my 5th year of doing digital art, which sounds like a long time and doesn't at the same time. Anyway, I got my first drawing tablet 5 years ago, and since then I've been drawing the same illustration every year. Each picture shows my different stages of drawing, which I'll go into detail in a moment. So this is the picture I referenced. Not my art, by the way. And there's several things wrong about it. Actually, the more you look at it, the worse it gets. I'll come back to this in a few minutes. Let's talk about my last few years of drawing experience. Disclaimer, if you are a beginner artist and do some of these art mistakes, I'm not pushing you down for it. Art is a learning journey, and I'm sure most, if not all, artists have done some of these at some point. I'm berating my past self because I can, and it shows not only me but also you what I improved on, and hopefully it can help you on what to avoid and or improve on as an artist yourself. What I'll define as a year of drawing depends on the art style of a certain time, which surprisingly was roughly a year. I think it will be easier to navigate my progress because each one of these pictures falls into one of these styles. It will better explain my thought process at the time, and I don't have to worry about how every year I made a yearly drawn picture on a totally different month from the last. I will start each illustration with a basic rundown of my style at the time, if you can call it a style. Then I'll roast each picture on how well their proportions, line art, or cleanliness, colors, and artistic liberties are. Artistic liberties can range from changing the placement of positions or objects, or the addition of new elements. Okay, good. Prepare for me to rant. So I started digital art. Yay. And let's just say I'm not proud of these drawings, but if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be where I am now. So, my style at this time was defined as stiff headshots, large heads, small hands, and airbrush shadows. Oh boy. So this was my first digital art piece. Can you tell? Can you tell that I fell for every beginner art mistake that I could possibly do? I'll go down the list for you and explain why I did it. Number 1. Proportions. I was a traditional artist before this time, and I drew realistic people, which is why I wanted to try a stylized picture, which I didn't know how to do. The tablet was so slippery and I had to look at the monitor and not my hands because it was disconnected. I just couldn't draw well at all, which was kind of depressing. I've gotten better though. Number 2, line art. I had just started watching digital artists and the majority had line art, so I guess I have to use line art in mine, right? Right? You don't use line art when drawing realism, so I didn't know how to do line art because I have never had to do it before. It took me forever. I was actually surprised, and still am, that it looks this good. As messy as it is, it was still a good go for my first digital piece. There are a few things wrong with it, like the lines are overlapping and some areas are not as clean as others. The big thing I want to point out is the color. I don't remember what I was thinking about the color, but why pink? Why is the line art for the hair lighter than the hair itself? I think it's because I worked so hard on the line art that I wanted to be able to see it. But why did I choose pink for that? And her crown too? And why did I do the same thing to the eyelashes? They're disappearing into the hair. I am lost. Number 3, the coloring. I remember watching videos on how to shade digitally. You use an overlay layer and add black to add shadows and add white to create highlights. And it really shows. You can tell I shaded with black. And you can tell that I used the airbrush the entire time for it too. I also didn't know what alpha lock was, so I had to meticulously do the shadows as to not get them to go in places I didn't want them to. The shading is a mess. Her chest and the blue are too vibrant compared to her face, which is supposed to be the focal point. I have failed as an artist. At least this part looks alright. Forget about artistic liberties, there aren't any. Alright, year 2. What can I say about it? It was a phase. At this time, I was doing more landscapes instead of characters. I also didn't do a lot of digital art these first 2 years because I was more interested in photo manipulation, and I was kind of busy around that time. This style is defined as the shade everything in black and white, then use blending mode stage. Lines and hard edges are defined by a messy sketch because I didn't want to do line art and I wasn't confident in defining shapes without it. And let's not forget the large head and tiny hands that were still present during this time. So what is wrong with this piece? The head is still big and the eyes are a little too wide for my liking, but other than that, the proportions are pretty alright in my opinion. As mentioned previously, the edges here are defined as a sketch that I set to multiply due to my incompetence to draw only one line per edge. This makes the picture look messy and chaotic. Color? I don't see any color. Oh wait, it's just so desaturated that I thought I was imagining it. And some parts are actually just gray because I didn't think to cover the entire area with, what's that? Pink? Whoa, the pink has returned and it's still not pretty. Jokes aside, the coloring is messy, to put it lightly. A light is supposed to be very bright and yet it doesn't show on the face. In fact, the most saturated and brightest part of the entire piece is again, the metal. I'm starting to think I just did these to do metal instead of the character. There's only one thing I could say. I moved the staff forward. Now is it better than the last picture? Yes, the shading itself is better, even if the colors aren't. I'm definitely more comfortable with the drawing tablet because I'm able to actually draw someone with more correct proportions. And this was a step away from line art, because I wasn't confident in that, and this is a good step towards going to lineless. I also figured out that I probably shouldn't do blending modes at this time and focus on finding a comfortable brush to use and get more edge and shading definition. Now look at me, I'm doing lineless and using blending modes. Year 3 was one of my biggest turning points and made me go from happy beginner artist to excited intermediate artist. You might be shocked at how much improvement happened within a year, but I had a lot of extra time and I did a lot of sketching at this time. I found out that I like to use textured brushes to do most of the coloring, preferably a charcoal or pastel brush. This is because it gives a messy edge that looks similar to traditional paintings, which is a look I really like. I was able to still use my sketch for a more defined edge, but it didn't look messy because everything else was. Also, no blending modes required. I mix colors like a true traditional artist. This year was also the year of painterly pictures that were more desaturated. A lot like year 2 was, just with more natural colors and a better drawing style. Couple this with adding more realism and dramatic lighting, and boom, 2023 art style. So here's the picture. What do I think? Well, the head's still big. I also think the eyes are a little too small. Same with the ear. Again, realism was affecting my art at this time. Some of the perspective lines are off. The mouth is wrong. Like last year, I used my sketch as the line art, but this time it looks really clean. I made sure it was, though I don't know why her crown is melding into her hair. I gotta say, this was probably the most saturated picture I did in this era of my art, and I'm glad it stuck. Finally, something to talk about with this topic. For this picture, I wanted to use brighter colors and more dramatic lighting. In this art era, I was really focused on contrast. You can see this with how bright the staff and her face are compared to her hair actually disappearing into the background. If I were to do this now, I'd blend the character into the background more to make the lighting even more dramatic. Again, I used a textured brush for this picture, which is a stylistic choice. Also, turning her hair into a soft blanket was also a bold stylistic choice. Other than lighting and hair, what else did I want to improve on? Well, I wanted to fix the proportions up, like try to fine-tune on how I want to draw the face and stop drawing my head so big. I also worked on edge control. How soft versus how hard an edge is. Like if you look at this picture, everything has a very hard edge, where in some areas it would have been better if it had a softer edge. With all this said, this picture was actually the transition of year 3 to year 4. I kept the very saturated colors, the textured brush, the painterly look, and over the next few years, I just fine-tuned the style into what it looks like today. Year 4. This was the year I studied character design and landscapes. I practiced illustrations at this time because this was the year I started my channel. And you can really see that I'm honing into how I like to draw and what I like to draw. So what's different about this year compared to last year? Smaller heads, dramatic lighting, bolder colors, and more shape definition in the hair and face. You probably noticed that I have a more distinct way of drawing the facial features too, as I moved to a more stylized look. So here's the 2024 version, and you can clearly see the art style change when they're side by side. You'll probably also notice that I copied the reference picture more accurately this time. I'll explain why that's bad after this segment. I like these proportions. I think the eyes are fine and the nose actually looks good on this one. I don't think I'll ever get the lips right, but they're okay in this piece. I like how I shrunk the head a bit. I think I needed to work on the body proportions a bit more. I kind of think that her arm is a little too thin. Same for her neck. Like the previous 2 years, I used my sketch as the line art. However, it's very hard to see it in this piece. That's because I would merge my sketch down on my coloring layer and paint over it, making it practically disappear. You see this with her hair, face, ear, and even parts of her armor. However, there are parts where I didn't erase the sketch as much, or at all. It's most prominent in the staff. The problem with this is that it's not consistent. I don't mind that I blended the sketch out for her face or hair, but why does the staff get really defined outlines when the rest of the armor doesn't? I feel like this is where I needed the sketch because it almost looks like the metal is merging into her skin. I don't really understand what I was thinking back then. Did I want line art or did I not? I feel like it's a little contradictory here. This piece is more saturated with the skin, hair, and staff. Gone are the muted colors, and I think I learned how lighting works a bit better. Shadows are cooler due to the blue background, while the highlights are warm because of the yellow light from her staff. This is called color theory, and there's a lot that goes into it, so we're not going to talk about it right now. Basically, because I color shifted the highlights and shadows depending on the background and light source, anything that appears warmer is brought to our attention, while everything that's cooler is pushed back towards the background. You won't see this kind of color variation in any of my older pieces, and because of that, many of them appear dull. I have 3 things for this one. The staff is smaller. Whether that's a good or bad thing is unclear. The armor is chunkier. A little too much, I'd say. The shoulder pieces kind of make her look like she's shrugging. I changed the hair. And like the last picture, I gave this piece actual chunks of hair with additional strands for that matter. Now what did I want to change for this drawing? Less wispy hair strands. They're a little too distracting. More delicate armor. She is a princess after all, not a warrior. Color variation. Her shirt is the same color as her hair, which makes everything seem too saturated in my opinion. Strong focal point. The focal point of this picture should be the face, however I tend to look at the staff instead. I believe it's because there's more visual contrast to it in comparison to her face. Before we continue, let me explain a few terms I will be using. Contrast. There are several types of contrast in art, but the one I'll be talking about is value contrast. Value is how dark or light a color is. It can be a gray, blue, or pink. These are darker values, and these are lighter values. Value contrast is best defined with a grayscale spectrum. To put it very simply, this arrow is for highlights, while this arrow is for shadows. And the further these arrows are from each other, the more contrast they have to each other. Let's cut the picture in half. On this side, the staff is very bright yellow, very easily the brightest object in the illustration. Couple that with the dark blue background and it becomes so much brighter and visually eye-catching. You can see this very clearly when we turn it into black and white. The background appears very dark while the staff is extremely bright. Compare that to this half. Many of the colors feel very similar in value. If we turn this half black and white, it is very obvious the skin is really similar to the shades of the metal. The shadows aren't dark enough and the highlights aren't bright enough. There's not as much contrast in comparison to this half, therefore it's not as visually clear. That's why I tend to look at the staff more than the actual character. The last thing is shape definition. Everything looks too fuzzy and soft in this piece. As mentioned before, the metal should look solid, so I'll have to work on that. Yeah, that was a lot, but it shows that I have a more advanced understanding of art in comparison to how I started only 4 years ago, and I hope to improve even more in the years to come. At the beginning of this video, I explained that I would be talking about the reference picture I used for all the drawings. I even stated that it was a bad idea that I copied it as close as I could with the last drawing. Why? Well, sit down, folks, because I'm about to explain why I think this picture was made with AI. I'm not the one to question if someone is using AI. I actually use it as inspiration to get a general idea on how I want to compose certain illustrations. But I also feel a little disappointed because I was using a supposedly so generated picture as my main reference for 4 years, without even knowing. Some of my illustrations have those AI flaws in them now because I thought they were normal. So what are they? This picture looks fine to you, right? Based off the flare here on the staff and the hard light here on the face, I can assume the light is coming from above. If that's the case, why is the light inconsistent? In this area, it looks like the earring is also creating light, and there's a green light coming from where? This shadow doesn't make sense. This highlight doesn't make sense. Why are we looking up at the staff here but down at it here? Why isn't the staff straight? It looks like it's bending here. The pyramid thing doesn't even line up with it. Is this strand of hair behind the staff or in front of it? Where'd these come from? The ear is detached from her head and doesn't even match the head's tilt or angle. Are these patterns supposed to look the same? The crown melds into her head. Hold my staff, ere I must stretch forth mine arm to nowhere. Yep, she's not holding the staff. So yeah, I think this is AI, and I showed this to another artist and they also agreed, but what do you think? Even a few years ago, I thought something was wrong with the position. I got rid of the ear on every one and positioned the arm in a more natural way. And this one, I copied the staff because I wanted to see how accurately I could copy a picture. And it's wrong! For 5 years, though. 4 years of this. Year 5, the year I finally discovered that my original reference was AI. It's also the year I did the most digital art due to monthly challenges. In March, it was draw a rain world doodle every day, which I turned into complete illustrations. And in July, I participated in Art Fight, which I also did complete illustrations. I posted a couple short videos on those months if you want to check them out. In short, I did at least 50 digital illustrations within 4 months, which I probably didn't even reach with the last 4 years combined. Since I was doing a drawing at least once a day for a couple months this year, I had to draw things fast. And this really affected my style when it comes to digital art. I had to express the characters in a quick and clear way, whether it was body language or expression. I needed to frame the composition so you could see these characters very easily, very quickly, and I had to separate the characters from the background somehow. I learned very quickly that I had to do dynamic and expressive gestures. I drew these sketches in less than 5 minutes, depending on the perspective I was using and how much was happening in that scene. I was doing these sketches as fast as I could because coloring and rendering took so long. You know what else takes forever to do? Line art. I had a period in my life where I didn't use line art at all for my characters and backgrounds, and I actually had a hard time getting the character to stand out from the background. This is when I started using the hue shifting and dramatic lighting to my advantage, but that still took a lot of time to do. Even with the dramatic lighting, my characters still tended to meld into their surroundings, because as I pointed out from the last year, I didn't know edge control. So what did I do to fix this? I went back to line art. If I just lined the character and added the lighting on top, the character stood out from the background very easily. And due to the line art, I didn't need to do clean coloring, which helped a lot in cutting down the coloring stage. And to cut down the coloring stage even more, I used more than one brush. I would cel shade the character, which was already quicker rendering than what I usually do. Then I softened the edges with an airbrush or my favorite pastel brush, depending on how textured I wanted the shading to be. The soft shading of the face or faces of the characters in comparison to the painterly backgrounds I still do brought more attention to where I wanted the viewer to look. All these elements, though simple and look pretty graphic, allowed me to draw most of these in a few hours, which would have taken me days to do the previous year. So long story short, my style this year is very dramatic lighting, dynamic poses, introduction to atmospheric depth and perspective, and graphical rendering. And finally, let's look at the 2025 Hilda redraw. Bam! What do you think? Quite the difference, I'd say, from the last couple years. Still have some elements from those 2 years in this drawing, but I'd say it's used in a more professional way. I like these proportions. I like how I finally made the head a reasonable size. The eyes aren't too big or too small. The nose is simple, even though the lips are still the hardest part to render on the face. The body looks great, and I showed a hand! So you get to see how that looks like. There is not much I want to change about the proportions. I think the most I want to do at this point is detail the eyes a bit more and figure out how to render lips better. Yeah, I'm really happy with this. We have come back to the line art. It has been 4 years, and my gosh, it looks much better. It gives everything a harder and clearer edge, but since I colored it, it still has this softer look in comparison to the first picture or completely black line art. The colors I chose for the line art weren't pink. They were either the shadow color of the part they were lining or a darker version of the shadow color. It reads more clearly. For the last picture, I claimed that every purple looked the same. For this picture, I made sure they were all different. I also took the saturated colors and ran with it. It was so much more pleasing to look at when it looked like this instead of this. I made the backgrounds less saturated because, let's be realistic here, not everything has to be saturated. I only hyper-saturate the parts I want my viewers to look at. And look, room lighting! I used room lighting before, though it was more of an afterthought than anything else. Now, if there's a way to add room lighting, I'm doing it. This entire piece is probably an artistic liberty. I changed the entire position of Hilda to make her more commanding and show off my dynamic posing. I added a hand, like, wow, expert over here. I made her staff longer and regal. I added details to the armor, even if you can't see it well. I actually referenced a real picture of Hilda for this. Rim lighting, cause yes. And the hair is where I want it to be. not where my reference said it should be. I added extra flyaway hairs over the line art layer. It was an experiment, but one of the best ones, I think. I also didn't draw her circlet going over her hair, and this honestly looks better. So I praised this drawing in every way, but what is something I could improve on or want to add to make it better for next year? I want to render the face in a more realistic way. Well, I could have done better on the skin. I wish I did better on the skin. Like, this is alright for this picture. For next year or sometime in the future, I want to do a softer rendering style on the face, while everything else becomes more painterly towards the edges. Again, I want to actually be good at doing lips, maybe the ears, and perhaps work on the eyes more. I don't think this is the shape or look I really want. Maybe something softer. I should probably tone down the scepter's light a little more, and I think in some places I didn't add enough texture to them. Like, the only texture I could see on this right away is the hair, a little on the staff, and maybe the rim lighting. I kind of wish I added more to her clothing and maybe more harder edges to the middle. I also think her lower body and back part of her hair could have been pushed more into the background. I think the biggest flaw about this picture, other than the skin rendering, is her expression appears more neutral than I wanted it to be, and the tilt and angle of the head isn't what I imagined, so maybe I can get that right next year. Like, I really like this piece, easily one of my favorites, but there's always something we can improve on, even if it's really minor and no one even knows until you point it out, and even then, not many will really care because your art is good enough for them. Yeah, that's fine for you, but I'm working on making my art good enough for me. And I'm getting really close. I look at all these pictures and I'm like, wow, they're all so different. I'm looking back and seeing what I've changed, how I've improved. Like, I'll give you a list of interesting things that I noticed. I drew each ear differently, not one matches another. I find it funny how I drew eyelashes on these pictures when I never draw them in any other illustration. She's the only one with lipstick, and I don't think I'll ever go back to it. I used the AI reference for the first picture, which makes the staff look weird. Then I lost that reference for these 2 years, and the staff actually looks more realistic. I then found the reference again for this picture, and the staff is back to looking weird, though the rendering doesn't make it look that bad. I finally learned that this was AI, and I drew the staff the way I wanted to, and it somehow looks way better than any other staff-like object that I tried drawing. I only realized when I started scripting this video that this picture is the only one that doesn't have Hilda looking at us, and I don't know if I should be annoyed about it. I added a hand to this one, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. Will I have to draw both hands next year now? I remember when I started to draw each version, I would claim that I'll do the hair better this time. I think I accomplished that. Each year, starting at year 2, I add more metal. I think the only thing that stayed constant with every piece is how saturated their eyes are. I have made it a pattern on if Hilda gets her earrings or not. I made this one wear light purple gloves because I forgot she actually wore white. And her white cape? Yeah, I forgot that too. There's several other things I noticed about these pictures, but I need to save some for next year. If I do it next year, that is. If I do, it won't be in the same date as this one. So that's my digital art process. If you listened this far, thank you. This was a lot of talking, and I appreciate it if you could hit the like button. And if you aren't already, subscribe, because I'm going to do a voiceover on how I drew my year 5 version soon. If you're interested. I am tired of talking, so that's all for now. See you in the next video.